Okay, so we're still in the live settings panel and we have 3 more sections to cover here. The first is keys lock, then we have voice grouping and humanize. Now, if we click on the keys lock, you'll see once again it activates a white sub menu, and that's called Scale Notes Map. And if we click on that, you'll see a drop down menu. Now, keys lock is a very handy feature. If you're like me and you don't play keyboards, but you want to maybe riff on certain keys and not play the wrong notes, you can simply map all the notes within the chosen scale. We're going to get to how you choose a scale in a bit. You can just make sure that those notes are mapped on your keyboard, so it will just not include any notes outside of the scale. So if you play white keys or black keys, starting from C, it will play the notes totally within your scale and you will not hear any wrong notes. Okay, and here you have scale notes only, and that's slightly different. If you play your scale, it will keep these all normal, but it just won't play the notes that are outside of your scale. So you can, if you're a musician and you want to still play correctly, as it were, if you press any of the keys that are outside of your scale, you just won't hear any sound, but it will keep them in place, if you see what I mean. And then you can choose scale white keys, and that will just deactivate all the black keys on your keyboard, and it will map your scale to the white keys, starting again at C with your root note of your scale. And then chord notes and chord extensions. These are slightly different. If I click on chord notes, you'll see you can choose a specific segment of the keyboard, and it will then play the notes of the last chord that you played, and it will only do that within a certain part of the keyboard. And this is really useful if you want to add extra notes to your chord, maybe add them in a different place. And similarly, chord extensions. This will include notes that will still fit within your chord, but they'll be higher up. This is really, really useful for adding high note melodies and have your chords play underneath as normal. So keys lock, we'll get into some examples of that later on, but that is a really handy feature. Okay, and next we have voice grouping. This does involve a little bit of music theory here. If you activate voice grouping, once again you get the flashing blue on and off, then you get your drop down menu, and you see the first one is dynamic, and then you've got these kind of dynamic plus. When building chord progressions, what you want to avoid is any really unnatural sounding leaps between the root notes, and it can just sound awful. So to speed things along, it's rather clever. It uses this group voicing dynamic mode where as you build up chord progressions, Scalar will help you avoid those huge unnatural leaps in your chords, and then you can limit these to within an octave or 2 octaves, which is really handy. And then you've got these groupings here which just limit the chords to certain ranges of the keyboard, and this is really tailor-made for example, sample libraries, where perhaps you have an orchestral sample library and you are limited along your keyboard to where the lowest note of the instrument and the highest note of the instrument is. So you would choose the appropriate grouping. Low down on the keyboard, maybe that's where your cello or even your double bass is located, and maybe C2 to B3 just covers another horn range, and C3 to B4, maybe that's your violas or something. That's something you will need to work out with whatever sample library you're using, but these are very handy. It won't go outside of those ranges for you, and that really helps speed along your workflow. The remaining options, I guess, can't avoid going into a tiny bit of music theory here, but it's quite simple. Closed voicings are chords that are tightly bunched, all within 1 octave, for example, and like triads, you would have the notes all right next to each other, but open voicings stretch the chord out, so you might have a root note in 1 octave and then other notes would then go outside that octave, and that's called open voicing, and you can choose to have those, and you can even stretch your chords out to open voicing plus 1 octave. And the final section is grayed out at the moment, extracted, because we don't have any chords that we've inputted and detected, but you can extract the chord voicing that you have played in to scalar, and you can then apply the extracted voicing to other chords, and you can try all the other chords in that exact same voicing that you've input. So we'll give musical examples of these later on in the tutorial. Once again, we're just quickly going around the GUI to show you where everything's located. Everything will make sense once we get into the musical examples. Here, our final part in our live settings panel is the humanize feature, and this is rather more self-explanatory. Rather than just have all the notes when you export the MIDI, for example, or when you're playing your notes from scalar, you can randomize or humanize the velocity of each note. So instead of every single note playing at exactly the same velocity, which isn't very realistic. It's more like how a robot would play the piano. You can randomize the velocity, randomize the timing, introduce little pushes here and there so that you'll get a nice human feel to the timing, and you can choose both, and you can humanize both velocity and timing together. Okay, so that covers the live settings panel. Okay, so we continue our whiz around the GUI of Scalar 2, and we come to this nice button here, this star shape, and here we have various options of playback, preferences, and session. Session, quite self-explanatory. Here you can import a previously built up instance of Scalar, or you can export to your hard drive, which you can then of course import again, and you can completely clear what you've built up within Scalar and start afresh. And you can use multiple instances of Scalar 2 within your DAW session. This is because you can of course use one instance of Scalar to drive one instrument, and then you might have 2, 3, 4 instances of Scalar all set to the same scale, maybe driving other instruments. So you click on sync, and this will sync all your multiple instances. You get a warning sign to say that all these settings will also be copied to the other settings of the scalar, your selected sound, your articulation, and your progression builder. Okay, so we'll come out of there, and that pretty much deals entirely with this section. We've covered the upper quarters, shall we say. Now we come to the second quarter down, and you can see we start over on the left hand side, and this is where we choose our input source, and we can choose to have MIDI input, and we simply input our MIDI keyboard, or you can choose audio, and we'll come to that when we play some audio into Scalar 2. Below that we have some transport buttons. At the moment we haven't got any of these activated, but all I have to do is click record and then maybe input a chord, and you can see there it's input that, or we can trash that and start all over again and deactivate record, and then we can carry on while record is deactivated, trying out different chords without it actually placing a chord marker within our GUI. That trash button, you could see that got rid of the chords, so just show you that again. It gets rid of everything we have in there. And then we have a play button, so if we record, and then if we press play, okay, and now you can see when we go back to settings how the playback is affected. So at the moment we've got it on every 2 beats. If we want it on every 1 beat, okay, so we can have it every bar. Okay, and then we can trash it and go back to a fresh slate. Okay, so all of that is done within the detect mode. And if we go over to scales and we click on scale mode, you'll see here this middle section of the GUI fills with all these strange words. And they are basically every single scale and mode you can think of within music. And we really, when we're choosing a scale, if we want to work this way by choosing a scale first, we really need to narrow these down. So the first thing to do is to go to this drop-down menu here where it says all notes at the moment, and we select a root note that we want our scale to be in. So let's choose E, and you see here it narrows the scales down. There's still loads of them, but they are at least now all within the E scale. And then we need to narrow them down further by going into types. Now here you have, again, loads and loads of choices. You can see how many choices there are, and most of these I would have to explain some music theory, which we don't want to do. So let's just stick within these major types here, and you've got the major scale and the minor scale, and then you've got these modes, so we're just going to stick with these. Now if I choose the major scale, you'll see here we've only got one option now, so we click on that. You'll see our keyboard, our virtual keyboard here, has got these blue little tags on each of the notes, and this button here is a play button, and if we play our scale, not only will we be able to get an idea of the notes within the scale and the kind of mood that the scale suggests. It should be happy, light, bright and positive because we've got a description here. It will also highlight each note within the scale as we go along. So let's press play and let's watch the notes get highlighted. Okay, so we're starting up here, so if we watch that again, or alternatively, if we press this little I, you can see the scale notes here. So we got E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and they are the notes that make up the E major scale. Now, if we go back into here, we can get a bit more creative and maybe choose one of the modes. Now, if we choose Dorian mode, and now we press play, now listen to how the notes have slightly changed. They should be now jazzy, bluesy, rocky, and sound slightly sophisticated. You see now we've got a G and a D here, which aren't in the E major scale. Sounds kind of Eastern, and E Dorian does have a kind of Eastern feel to it. Once again, if we want to make a note of what the notes are now, we see we have E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp and D. Okay, now this mode thing here, that is music theory stuff that we don't need to go into. Very, very basically, it's whatever mode we're in. Modes are kind of built off the major scale, and that tells you what note it's built off within that scale. So yes, don't need to really go into that, but if you're interested in the theory, that is a very handy little bit of info for you. So now we have our E Dorian mode selected, and the best way I think to play this for my particular skill set is to go into our keys lock and make sure scale white keys is selected, and we can test this by highlighting our scale notes here, and if I play C, we should get an E. There we go. Can you see E there? Even though I'm actually playing a C on my physical keyboard, you'll see the E has lit up, and that's because E is the first note within the E Dorian mode. And now the next note should be an F sharp. So if I just play the next white key, there we go, F sharp. Now it's lit up the F sharp, but you'll see obviously as an X on because it's disabled it on my actual keyboard. I am actually playing the second white key on my keyboard, which is a D, but it's playing the F sharp as it should. Now the next note should be a G, so this is the third white key. There we go. And so forth. Should be an A, and then a B, C sharp, and a D. So if I was to now just jam on the white keys, I'm just totally in the E Dorian mode. Sounds very, very musical, sounds quite sophisticated, and all I'm doing is riffing on the white keys and coming up with a nice kind of gentle sounding melody. Okay, so you can already see how this is going to help you, and all I've done pretty much is use keys lock and chosen a scale. And of course we don't need to just play a nice pretty melody like that, we can stay within our white keys and play a nice chord. Okay, so, I could have routed that out of scalar and controlled another instrument with it, maybe set it to record, and I could have recorded that. So there you can see how you can use scalar to play in a particular scale or a mode, and even if you're not a musician like me, you can just select all the white keys and you will stay within that mode. And yeah, it sounded quite nice to me. Okay, so that's detect mode and scales mode, and you just have songs, artist and user, and we don't really need to go into those. These songs are songs that the creators of Scalar 2 have come up with their own progressions, so maybe they're good as learning tools to see particular genres, how the kind of chords they use, the kind of movement of the chord progressions and stuff. And artists, again, they've got artists such as the late great Mike Huckabee creating some wonderful chord progressions, and you can use these to get some nice ideas. You might sort of make notes of your favourite progressions. You might say, wow, I love the way that chord goes into that chord, and just use little bits. But again, I would steer clear of these, certainly if you are making original tracks of your own. And then the final option here, use just straightforward, import your chord sets, and you can open the folder and choose between them. So slightly different from the saving your sessions, of course. There you can build up these nice chord progressions and save them all, and have a nice folder of your own.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content, and if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.